everybody, what is going on? I am Maximus Rex, and this is Big Baby Reviews. Check out my comics, Big Baby and STARCRASHER, at KINGCOMICS.CA. So today, guys, wildcard day, we're looking at something a little bit different from our regularly scheduled videos and cast of artists during the rest of the week. So today, we're looking at Spider-Man and Wolverine issue 3 from September 2025. As you know, most modern comics that I review, I save for Wildcard Day. We've already done issue 1 and 2 of this series. Why Spider-Man and Wolverine? Well, the main attraction for me is always the art. So, you know, this guy's been kicking around for a long time, but I would guess deem him a modern artist. So KAARE Andrews is kind of doing a 90s style pastiche on this Wolverine Spider-Man series. As you can tell from the cover here, if you're familiar with Todd McFarlane, you can see some of his kind of stylistic ticks coming through in the artwork here. Obviously not a full McFarlane thing. KAARE Andrews has definitely his own style and is quite the chameleon when it comes to using different styles, right? When he did the Spider-Man Reign series, which was kind of like his version of Dark Knight Returns, but for Spider-Man, there was clearly a lot of Frank Miller influence on that one. So he's, again, has a pretty strong established style, but is able to act as a chameleon and kind of take in some of those stylistic ticks from other artists and incorporate them into his work. And clearly for this series, he's going for that 90s vibe, and it totally shows on this cover. Great shot of Wolverine running towards us, Spider-Man, and the giant dinosaur T-Rex in the back, with some added pterodactyls there in the background. Clearly cluing us in with the type here into the Savage Land. So that's where the story is going to be taking place. And the cover, definitely a good depiction of what we're going to get on the inside of the cover as far as story and as far as the art as well. So let's crack open, have a look inside. So right away, starting off here with his depiction of Spider-Man, right? You can already pick up, like I said, on those McFarlane ticks, slightly cartoonier style, the really big eyes, the little tick lines that he's going to be using in the detail you can see on the edge of the fingers here. Definitely very reminiscent of how McFarlane incorporated the character, or excuse me, incorporated his stylistic ticks into the character in the 90s. And kind of a throwback here. I'd been talking about how, you know, we had the newer Wolverine kind of design. Not my favorite design. The classic Spider-Man, which is fine here, as you're going to see throughout the issue. Got a great splash page here. We're going to get that black costume, which I guess now is classic from the 80s and early 90s, at least for a little bit there. And when you see Wolverine as well, you're going to see that he's in his tan brown costume, which is my preferred costume when it comes to Wolverine. Not the original costume, but I always found the color scheme made a little bit more sense as opposed to the yellow and blue. I get for printing and publishing the color contrast, but, you know, kind of a stealthy character hunting in the woods, you know, that Wolverine kind of trope that he does a lot. Being dressed up in blue and yellow seems kind of counterproductive to being stealthy. So yeah, I've always thought the brown tan costume at least made a little bit more sense as far as, say, camouflage, right? Great splash page. Again, you can see how he's worked in McFarlane ticks. Definitely McFarlane style pose here. The way he foreshortens legs and stuff, I think, is very reminiscent of McFarlane. Even pushes it a little bit past that, where like the feet are cartoonishly shaped for sure throughout this issue. But McFarlane would do, you know, a certain level of that. It feels like KAARE Andrews is just pushing it into the extremes, which is fine though, because the artwork is just stellar throughout. I've talked a little bit about how some of the coloring, some of it I like and some of it kind of bothers me. All these kind of light reflections on the web and on the eyes and stuff is a little much for me. But other than that, the basic kind of color schemes used here work pretty well. Got credits. So writers Mark Guggenheim, color artist Brian Reber, artist KAARE Andrews, cover artist KAARE Andrews. The way they lay these out, it's kind of weird, right? Obviously, you're going to read from left to right, but then because of the color, I feel you read from top to bottom and then move over to the right. So kind of feels like KAARE Andrews isn't being credited really in the right spot, in my opinion, but what are you going to do? Oh, and I forgot about letterer VC's Travis Lanham, whatever that means today, because I'm pretty sure we've got digital fonts all the way throughout here. So pretty cool sequence here, which again, I feel like KAARE Andrews is kind of bringing us back to the 90s and reminding of certain cool stories and comics from the 90s that we enjoyed. So right away, this kind of evokes Wolverine Jungle Adventure to me, where that was written by Walt Simonson and drawn by Mike Mignola. I'm pretty sure I've got a review of that. You can check it in the archives. But that's what I think of when I see this story. One of my favorite stories, Wolverine stories, when I was a kid, and I got that deluxe prestige format comic book, whatever you want to call it. Still one of my favorites today. And I definitely feel like KAARE Andrews is harkening back to that, not necessarily with the Mignola style, but with the setting, obviously. And throughout, he's given us kind of classic 90s inspired or 90s style poses. I don't know how else I would define that. This shot here, you know, we've seen Wolverine in this position a million times. So I definitely feel like, you know, he's doing that on purpose to evoke those classic shots of Wolverine jumping out at you with the claws and stuff. But I think he does a really good job here. And like I said, that just slightly cartoony style, a bit of a manga influence as well, I think is really cool and really makes the characters alive and dynamic on the page. And he almost fits in like almost every, not exactly every page, but every 2 pages, you got kind of an anchor image, as it's called, you know, that big kind of bold image that jumps out at you and gets you excited about the book. And it's the kind of stuff you want to see and you want to draw as well, right? If you're an artist, you know, on this page, I would argue maybe Wolverine here, you know, exiting the T-Rex from the mouth is a pretty good anchor shot here. Pretty awesome. The little detail of all the slobber and stuff, I think is pretty cool there. And he's got kind of a slightly Kirby way of drawing fingers, even though he's got a cartoony style. He kind of squares things off at the end, which I always kind of associate with Kirby, right? He was the first to do those big square fingers. Some of the backgrounds here, you know, they're drawn on in certain panels, and others it just feels like, you know, someone slapped down a layer of clouds and stars and stuff. So there's kind of a give and take with the backgrounds, in the sense that in some panels I feel like there's enough, and others I feel like it's almost a Rob Liefeld situation where the artist didn't really want to draw the background. So, you know, these sections and these pages here kind of feel a little Rob Liefeld-esque, in that Rob Liefeld, I don't think, draws backgrounds anymore at all. Most of the times he just has the colors kind of slap something in the back, some clouds or some sky or something like that. So a little bit of that here, but, you know, obviously this is a monthly book. So KAARE Andrews, I think, is pretty good at sticking to the deadline up to this point. I haven't gotten past issue 4. I need to get to a comic shop soon and buy more of these, because I do know there's a fill-in artist on the next few issues, if I'm not mistaken, but he seems pretty cool. So I'll still be buying those issues, and then eventually leading back to more issues drawn by KAARE Andrews. Kind of a weird detail here, but how does anyone out there, can anyone explain, let me know in the comments, exactly how Wolverine's mask kind of wraps around his head and then folds in on the back here? You know, I've seen many different ways of depicting the back of his mask. I always felt like the flaps come out, like there's no reason for it to wrap around completely. So I'm always quite confused as to what Wolverine's, you know, mask design is from the back. Not quite sure anyone's ever defined it specifically, and every artist seems to have a different, slightly different interpretation of it. So if you know, last issue, right, Wolverine and Spider-Man fought, as Wolverine is definitely thinking that, Spider-Man is definitely thinking that Wolverine in the past was responsible for the death of his parents, right? And that's kind of where the storyline jumps off of here. Now, you know, Wolverine was wounded, and Spider-Man as well, last issue by Wolverine, and now they've just kind of woken up in the Savage Land. They're not quite sure why, but, you know, all will become clear a little bit later as we run into the antagonist, Kraven, and his bunch. So they're kind of, it's almost like a Predator kind of thing, where they've been brought to, you know, this jungle here, which is more specifically the Savage Land, to be hunted down by Kraven and his cohorts. And again, these 2 pages here, to me, evoke the 1990s Spider-Man storyline by Todd McFarlane, Perceptions, I believe it's called, where Wolverine guest stars in Spider-Man. They go off to British Columbia. So I feel like this is almost a little bit like a callback to that as well, even though we're in the Savage Land. A lot of this reminds me of that Todd McFarlane storyline where Wolverine and Spider-Man kind of team up in that series to find who they think is a child killer, and the child killings are being blamed on the Wendigo, and they know that, well, at least Wolverine knows that Wendigo is not killing children. It's a pretty good storyline, one of the more solid ones from Todd McFarlane, I find. Even though it's a little out of character for Spider-Man. A lot of the stuff that McFarlane did on that title was more kind of horror influence, so kind of an odd choice with Spider-Man, but I did really enjoy the Perception storyline, to be honest. So go check that out. Nice to see Peter David, rest in peace, passed away beginning of the year, fairly recently, and nice to see Marvel actually giving him a little bit of page coverage here, and a little bit of an overview of his career, because he was in it for a long time, right? And again, those anchor images, we got 2 of them here. Really cool. Wolverine, you know, kind of fighting off these arrows that have been shot at him with his claws, cutting them up. And, you know, here Spider-Man's swinging off and actually saving Wolverine, even though he still suspects he might be his parents' killer. So that's kind of nice of Spider-Man. But yeah, all this stuff just really cool and dynamic. And he's really got a handle on, like I said, kind of using the Todd McFarlane style to his advantage, you know, the cartooniness of it, the bubbliness of it, the round shapes and stuff, but not, you know, bogging the figures down too much with all of that noodly detail. He does a little bit of it, but it's very much subdued as opposed to how McFarlane would do it and how many lines are actually there. So it keeps it pretty clear and easy to read. And I'm suspecting also because he's on a deadline, he's doing a fairly monthly kind of schedule here. You know, adding all that extra detail would take time. So he's found kind of an economical way, a kind of in between the McFarlane style and I guess his own deadline style and how he's able to reach those deadlines. The first issue of this series definitely had a little bit more noodly art, and then he kind of pulled back on it as the series progressed. And I suspect, again, that has to do with time. But I don't feel like the art's lost any of its quality in any way. It looks really good still. And occasionally, like, you'll see stuff like this, where down here, I feel like he's doing a little bit of that Jim Lee style hatching, X-Men hatching on Wolverine here. And, you know, they're being attacked from the jungle, so very reminiscent of Predator to me. And then finally confronted by the person hunting him. This is always cheesy to me in comics when characters do this. I am Dread Shadow. They just kind of introduce themselves. You know, I guess, you know, you want the reader to know the name of the character, but it always just kind of feels really forced when a character shows up and just names himself, especially when you're attacking people, you know, like, hey, just by the way, just so you know, the person attacking you is called John, right? Just a weird kind of comic book trope. Great shot though here of Dread Shadow, very manga-esque, right? In its depiction here of whatever weapon he's got. He's got kind of a bladed weapon, almost looks like a lightsaber, and all these kind of emphasis lines all the way around. Looks really cool. I like here, so the McFarlane influence in as much as, you know, how much web there actually is in the shot and how much Spider-Man is using, but I do want to say that I feel like the textures, maybe earlier on in the series he was doing more of a McFarlane kind of style webbing, but now he's drawing a lot of it and it's very detailed, but I find like he's kind of found his own way of doing it that's, you know, somewhat different from McFarlane. There's still some of the McFarlane ticks with this little strand kind of wrapping around it and stuff, but over here it ends up maybe looking just a little bit more like an actual spider web to me. All these great shots though too, like the down shot on Wolverine here looks amazing. This shot of Spider-Man kind of holding and pulling the webbing and holding it on each side here, really good. You can, you know, he's added these little lines here, which is maybe more of a cartoony tick in comic books, but you can see that he's struggling and the muscles are kind of rippling and shaking as he's holding on here. And then finally we reintroduce Kraven here. It looks really cool. I guess they're trying to keep it somewhat mysterious with all the shadow and stuff, but obviously we know who that is, right? It's Kravinoff, as the narration says. Another anchor shot, all these cool, you know, action shots of Wolverine all throughout the series, this issue rather, really well done. And Spider-Man kind of reeling here from, you know, all this action and the fact that, you know, the claws, Wolverine's claws that stabbed through him last issue, the wound has been tended to, but it's not completely healed here. So I really like, once again, the posture kind of indicating that. And again, these kind of lines indicate kind of a shaking tremor kind of feeling to Spider-Man's muscles. And here's a good example too, again, of how adept KAARE Andrews is as kind of, you know, changing the aesthetic to not only, you know, individual stories and issues, but to individual panels here he's actually doing here. So we get kind of a flashback here where to the original moment where Spider-Man found out that the Finisher said he was the one who killed my parents originally, and that was in Amazing Spider-Man Annual 1964 number 5. So for that panel specifically, and to harken back to that moment, he's reverted to a very kind of retro style here that's, you know, I would say reminiscent of Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko. The smaller eyes on Spider-Man, you know, the old school kind of 60s spider logo on his chest, which is definitely not what he was doing when he was drawing the classic Spider-Man costume earlier in the series. So, and just the kind of slightly faded, you know, the black line here is not completely black. It's very much gray and gives that sense of nostalgia and oldness, if I can make up a word there. Now we do finally get introduced to Kraven and his team, right? and basically the same gentleman from before, and also a bunch of hunter ladies with skull masks on. Really, this design, again, I have to wonder if KAARE Andrews read Cyberforce, because I definitely get a bit of a Killjoy vibe with these ladies' design here. Killjoy being one of the villain characters from Cyberforce. And I mean, just excellent art and storytelling all the way throughout. Colors, again, I feel like they haven't gone so crazy on the digital effects other than that first splash page we looked at. You know, there's instances where those digital effects obviously work as well. Like, for instance, when he's hitting the button on this device here, which we find out is basically tied to the bracelets wrapped around their wrists and some sort of teleportation device. So it kind of works. Even this stuff I feel works color-wise just because we got a lot of contrast. And there's not as much of an overuse of all those things in this issue as I found with earlier issues. So they pulled back a bit, which works. But I mean, this is a good page to show you that sometimes, you know, the figures are very dark. So what would help is to not have such quite a dark background behind it, whether you're using just these color effects, whatever you're using. You know, a light color would definitely help all of that pop a bit more. You know, when you do a silhouette here on a darker background like that, it's not quite as effective. I mean, the artist is successful and does it well where it's fairly easy to read, but it'd be even easier if this color back here was a little bit lighter. So some of the pages, I feel the contrast is a bit off. And, you know, you turn the page here and then you get a page where the contrast is really on and really good. Deadpool and Batman, did not look into that. I do like Greg Capullo. I do think this cover is really cool. I'll have to take a look at that at some point, and I have to imagine, you know, they published a shitload of those, so I shouldn't have too much trouble getting copies of that, and eventually, again, doing a review of that at some point. Again, I got to get into a comic book shop. Haven't been in a while, so we end on a splash page here. Really cool shot of Dr. Octopus, and I like that he's really doing what I would call the chubby or slightly fat Dr. Octopus, right? The physiognomy, the anatomy, I think he got right here. And they find themselves in China. So, of course, you're going to depict the Great Wall of China, and that's where Wolverine and Spider-Man are teleported to. Why Dr. Octopus is in China, it's not explained. He does welcome them to China, but I guess we'll find out next issue exactly what's going on there. And I'm looking forward to it just because I really like KAARE Andrews' kind of more classic design choice, at least for Dr. Octopus, even though he's drawing him in his modern style and that slightly McFarlane-influenced look. Just really cool version of Dr. Octopus wearing that classic, you know, 60s costume, I guess is how I describe it. Now, let's just say that even in the shot here, he ethnically looks a little Chinese, so I don't know if he's doing that on purpose or even considered that. But maybe we'll find out more about, you know, his actual depiction of Dr. Octopus next issue, and maybe that won't be a thing, but here it just, you know, is there a connection between that look and the fact that he's in China? I don't know for sure. Again, we'll find out next issue. And once again, those long squared off fingers here definitely got that Kirby vibe to it, which I like. And, you know, an intelligent artist like KAARE Andrews, just smart enough to, you know, he drew all this. He already got lots of layering, foreground, midground, background, and just adding things like, you know, the extra bit of Octopus's tentacle here, and even just that extra bit of just the top of it here. Really adds to the layering and the depth of the image. But again, like all these highlights here, I'm not against highlights. It's just sometimes it feels a little bit abused. And this page and that first splash page with Spider-Man, I feel are an example of that. Maybe you do them smaller. Maybe you don't do them quite as bright. I don't know. But yeah, there's just something that I find a little bit visually distracting and annoying. When the artwork's so great, right? You don't want to take focus away from it with all these kind of, you know, digital effects. But that's just my opinion. Here's the cover to the next issue, and we'll be reviewing that sometime soon in the future. I remember looking at this and thinking, what is up with Venom here? That's kind of that pupil kind of look to his mask here, but then I realized that this is obviously based on the 94 Spider-Man cartoon. That's how his design basically was in that show, so that made sense to me. It's a pretty cool illustration here by Nick Bradshaw, who's got a huge Arthur Adams influence, but really has started coming into his own and moving away from that a little bit. Sometimes it's similar to, I feel like, Ryan Otley as well. Maybe he's somewhere in between there, but definitely a talented, solid artist for sure. All right, guys, there you go. That is it for today's review of Spider-Man and Wolverine issue number 3. If you're still watching the channel and you are subscribed, thank you so much for your loyalty and support. I really do appreciate it. Trying to hit the next milestone on YouTube. So if you can watch a few more videos, I need some extra watch hours there. That would really help me out. If you're watching but you're not subscribed, please do so below. It only takes a quick second for you, and it really helps the channel out, helps us grow, helps get us out there to other people who are into comic books just like we are. So speaking of comic books, I've got my own Big Baby and STARCRASHER. You can check those out at KINGCOMICS.CA. Once again, guys, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and have yourselves an awesome day.
Like, subscribe, like, subscribe.
King Comics presents Big Baby, Volume 1, Issues 1 to 13, 204 pages of story and art. King Comics also presents STARCRASHER one-shot, 32 pages, cosmic sci-fi surrealist adventure. You can find these fine comics at KingComics.CA, at MaximusRex13 on Instagram, or on Facebook, MaxRex or Big Baby.